All right, welcome to my talk about how to design a prize draw randomizer without bugs. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come up and speak to you all. A big thank you as well to all of our amazing sponsors and also the DDD team who make this all possible. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet. So my name's Camille, and today I want to take you on a little journey, which is the journey of your career. If I asked you all now to take a moment and think about how your career's gone, what would you think about? You might be thinking about, what skills have I learned that I didn't know before? How much has my salary increased since I started? And was I able to provide for my loved ones and my lifestyle? How many promotions did I have? Did I get recognized for my contributions? What projects have I worked on, and how have I changed the world? Did I end up where I wanted to be, and am I doing what I want to do in life? These are all very valuable things to reflect on, and things that are important in our lives. But I noticed something when reflecting upon this question myself. It isn't often that we stop to think about how our careers have changed us as people, and also how we've changed other people's lives. We don't often think about the uniqueness of our full selves and our experiences and what these have brought to the table. Now, being somewhat of a geek and a game developer, I found it easier to understand this when I visualized career journeys like video games. So what we bring to our careers starts well before we even get our very first job. We start off with, from birth, some things that have been out of your control. Someone's rolled the random selection and chosen for you your genetics, your family background, and your country or your culture. And these factors can have a big impact on what our interests, traits, values, and morals will be. A little bit of nature and a little bit of nurture. I'll call these things our initial stats. Maybe you grew up in a family of technically minded people who taught you from a young age things like maths and chemistry and even programming and had grand expectations of you. Or maybe you grew up in a family full of sporty-minded people where you were the black sheep, clinging to your Nintendo and your CRT monitor, much to the dismay of your family. Or maybe you had nothing to do with technology until much later in life. Factors such as those and how we respond to them have an impact on stats like our confidence, our independence, our willpower and ability to overcome challenge, how we deal with pressure, and our range of complementary or world knowledge. And they can also instill in us values of what we find important in life. So now we progress through our main storyline with these stats, and this involves a typical childhood, school, high school, and university before we get to work. There's also a whole bunch of little side quests that pop up and have an effect on you, whether you realize it or not. Those are things like that time you moved schools, that time you stood up to a bully, that time you won a scholarship, or that time you failed an exam. All of these can have a profound effect on shaping up these stats that collectively make up who you are. And then finally, we enter the kingdom of work. Now, I just want to examine our stats a bit here because I feel like this is where people are missing out on some things. Society tends to have some stereotypical views about what makes people successful in their careers. Traits such as confident, intelligent, hardworking, well-spoken, collaborative, and focused. A lot of people I've met focus on these sorts of things and think they're lacking. They lack the confidence needed to climb up the ladder, or they aren't as smart as everyone else in the room, or they like working on their own. I remember interviewing multiple people for a technical role a few years back. It was a role that required some advanced mathematics skills for robotics kinematics, and we interviewed some people who had PhDs and advanced degrees in maths. Very impressive on paper. We presented them with a fairly basic trigonometry challenge to start. This is my Trigosaurus, I'm very proud of that. It was quite interesting to see some people who had the advanced degrees and PhDs going about the challenge in a very complicated way, and quite confidently, I might add, and then eventually becoming defeated when they realized they didn't know how to do it. On the flip side, you had people who had much less academic experience or were less confident and had only high school mathematics skills who were able to complete the challenge successfully. We also had people who completed it successfully in simply saying, I don't know the equation to this, but this is what I do. It was a case of very educated people overcomplicating something that was actually quite simple. And perhaps their exposure to complicated questions prompted them to assume the answer was similarly complicated. Definitely in some situations, you absolutely do need those complicated solutions, but in this example, high academic knowledge didn't guarantee real-world success, while a simpler view of the world, mixed with things like calmness under pressure or critical thinking, was effective. So there are oftentimes many ways to achieve an outcome. Confidence is a big one that people dislike about themselves. When preparing this presentation, I asked a bunch of people that I know about their best and worst work-related traits. And this was by far the most popular disliked trait that people had of themselves. Funnily enough, it was mentioned by someone who I was actually going to use as an example. She said she doesn't have enough confidence and likes to validate things. I worked with this person for about a year and a half, and she, similar to me, is more of an anxious, worrisome person. We worked in a very physically high-risk environment, and understandably, that made us both even more stressed out as worrisome people. Some people wanted to steam ahead, and a handful like her tried to keep up with the pace while focusing on things like doing things safely, on ensuring our code had tests, double and triple and quadruple checking everything and looking out for everyone. She's someone who would always think of worst-case scenarios and would try to mitigate them. But the fact that she overthinks sometimes and needs to validate everything can be so valuable. They are massive strengths. It not only kept us physically safer, but it also made me feel more relaxed knowing that she was around. Knowing that there was someone there who was that observant and cautious made me feel safer. So while we need to not let those kind of things affect our lives in negative ways, this points out something very advantageous about you. Not everyone is capable of that extent of empathy, awareness of risks, and urgency to resolve issues. People who don't have confidence levels at 100 are extremely valuable in other ways, sometimes actually because they don't have 100 points of confidence and shouldn't feel like they're lacking. You have the same thing with company direction. There will always be some people who have big visions and say things like, yes, absolutely, we can do that for you in 2 months. And then you'll have other people who would shudder and say the same thing needs to be scoped out thoroughly and estimated, and they'll probably come back with a timeline more like 4 years. I know you probably all have stories similar to that one. We need both those people. We need people who are risk takers, who are enthusiastic and like to please. And we need people who are grounded, who are risk averse and are more cautious. This is a fantastic combination of different people who have different strengths. So if we examine again our stats, we should realize that these stereotypical ones are barely scratching the surface of what makes people successful, accomplished, and valuable. There are a whole lot more things that you offer, and some of those are actually things you think are weaknesses. So how can you reflect on this? Think about each thing that you've ever thought was your weakness, and then ask yourself, if a person like this joined my team, what would I get them to work on and why? Because sometimes I find it's much easier to think rationally when it's less personal for you. For me, I always used to think to myself, wow, my memory is really poor. I can never absorb things that I read about or hear about. I'm anxious and I worry a lot. I have difficulty focusing in meetings and miss a lot of what's going on. I surrounded myself with highly intelligent people and always felt very inadequate. How did I even get this far? And I realized that, well, maybe those things aren't actually the only recipe to success. Maybe I have some other stuff going on for me. My memory's poor, but I would sometimes take great notes to make up for that, notes which other people needed as well. It also made me great at learning how to teach things simply, which many of my fellow human beings need, because I understood what they'd have difficulty with. I worry a lot, and people, for some reason, tend to make me in charge of quality assurance for some reason, because I can be quite pedantic about it. I have difficulty focusing, but I like when people are concise and to the point. And it means I filter out things that maybe aren't the top priority to me right now and focus on things I actually do need to know. It's also because sometimes my brain is thinking about 100 different things at once, and that in itself is hectic, but also kind of awesome in a way. I surround myself with highly intelligent people and learn to appreciate that if I'm sitting at a table with them and I've been there for quite a while, then it probably means I have something equivalent to that which I bring to the table. And that makes me kind of proud. So I want to surround myself with even more impressive people because that means I'm leveling up in my own way and I can also learn a hell of a lot from them. Focusing on what we lack can sometimes prompt us into improving ourselves. But if we forget to focus on what we do have and what our strength really is in, then we can really lose out. Your collection of strengths is a lot bigger than you realize. So now that we know about your important part in your journey, let's take a look at things around you. As we've seen, it's important to observe different types of strengths. And this is true too when you look at other people around you in your career, not just yourself. You don't want the people around you to be exactly the same as you. Rather, you actually go a lot more when they're very different to you. And companies with the best culture tend to recognize this. So in a game, a party is meant to be a group of players who have complementary skills and work towards a common goal. You have tanks who are there to protect the other players and take most of the hits. You have mages who can deal damage from far away. And you have supporting classes like healers who are there to keep everyone alive. These are their strengths, and they each have different roles to play in the game. Now, if you had a party made up of purely tanks, you might tackle some of the easier challenges pretty quickly, but you'll probably all end up dying later on. And the same goes for if you had a party made up of entirely healers. You'd probably never die, to be fair, but you probably wouldn't go anywhere very quickly. So a party is meant to have people with different strengths so that you can cover all the bases and face different types of challenges together. And then in addition to your party, you can also see people like your managers as quest givers. They give you direction, the goals to accomplish, and resources to do so. But how do those different types of people change you as a person? Because you don't come out of your careers with the exact same set of stats that you started with. How about when you're tackling some enemies? So some of your party will be there to give you support, and some will require your support. Each time you provide support to a party member, you are actually strengthening your own stats. It's not a one-way relationship. You are increasing your points in communication, mentoring, and oftentimes your own understanding of what you're helping them out with. How many times have you been asked a question by someone and started to explain, only to realize you didn't really know how to explain it that well? Sometimes that's an indication that you don't actually know it well enough yourself. Or sometimes you'll explain something to others and realize you do actually know what you're talking about. Sometimes you'll ask them for assistance and actually answer your own question in the process. Now, because everyone's different, you also learn to adapt in the ways that you interact with them. That's a +1 to your perception and adaptation. This is especially hard when you have to give someone difficult feedback or constructive criticism. You're forced to improve your diplomacy and your logic to avoid confrontations and the wrong message being sent. Empathy is also something that I find greatly grows when you work closely in a team. The Dunning-Kruger effect suggests that the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. And for some of you, it makes you more humble, but it also gives us empathy for our fellow party members. We understand the difficult tasks they've been given. We see the long hours they work and understand that maybe their manager underappreciates them. When we realize how difficult something like coding is, we learn to appreciate everyone who does it too, because what we do, it is not easy. But the most important thing I found out about people around me was that they taught me who I want to be as a person. You meet people who inspire you, people you admire, and also people who show you who you don't want to be. I appreciated friendly and approachable leaders and wanted to be like them one day. I saw many team members who were overlooked in terms of the difficulty of the work they were doing and the effort they put in, and I always try to remind myself to appreciate them. I realized that things are rarely ever the fault of a single person, and that usually we're all trying to accomplish common core goals, just in different ways, not to sabotage one another. I saw toxic and abusive behavior, and I realized that after years of being quite submissive, that I was no longer able to tolerate that and was able to stand up for others. I took those interactions with people far beyond my workplace and into my everyday life. I realized more about who I wanted to be as a person. So what about them? As we saw earlier, working with someone is not a one-way relationship. Actions that you take in your career can change other people's lives too. You are an important part of their quest because every party member is a player in their own journey, each with their own set of stats, fears, and goals. We want each one of your party to level up and accomplish great things and have fun doing it. So what are some things that you do that proactively makes other people's lives better? Something I found to be a little underrated is fostering good team culture. Good culture for me is what makes me want to get out of bed in the morning and come to work. We all know we need the money, but working with people that you get along with makes it far less of a chore. So when you make people laugh, you actually make the work environment more relaxed. When you organize social events, make friendly banter, welcome new people and make them feel comfortable, and encourage a collaborative, no-blame environment, then this is all part of it. So are you someone who builds on the team's culture? Have you ever gone out of your way to help someone with a task that they were stressing about? Perhaps they had some tight deadlines or they were really unsure about how to do something. I'm sure you had your own tasks to do, but you still took some time out of your day to help them. And to be honest, this can have ramifications so much deeper than their deliverables being delivered. This has an effect on their stress levels, their work-life balance, and also their mental well-being. Not only have you helped them with their actual task, you have shown them that they are not alone. They have someone's support. They are part of your team and you have their back. Every time you mentor someone to upskill them, you are helping to increase their overall stats. You are sharing some of your past experience with them and how you overcame the challenges as well. This is often much faster than if they went it alone, and it's basically a way of duplicating your stats and your experience and passing it over to them. And lastly, one of the best things I find where you can really change people's lives is acknowledgement. Now, this can take the form of a simple sentence when you're thanking them for their work, or more public forms of recognition like shout-outs at a team meeting or your chat channels. Acknowledgement can be related to the work, or their ability, or their attitude, or the impact that they've had. And this goes a long way to telling people that you see their effort or their value and you appreciate it. They are appreciated. And there's something beautiful to see in the fact that human beings or pixel art characters can and do go out of their way to improve the lives of others and not for any reward. So always remember, there's so much more to the people around you than the work that you're doing together, because people change you every day and you change them too. So a game is often comprised of multiple levels. You can picture these like the various companies you've worked at, the various roles you've had, projects you've worked on, or challenges that you might not have encountered before. And just like in a game, often these levels will become harder as you progress through your journey. So it can become hard to realize just how far you've actually come. So here's us at our first level, slaying tiny dragons. And yes, that dragon has a nappy. We start off pretty weak because we're pretty new to this. So we still find it a bit challenging and confusing. This is pretty much the equivalent of learning Hello World when you don't know a single thing about programming. And as we get further through the levels, now we're stronger than we were when we started. but the dragons have actually gotten bigger too. They still feel difficult to us. This trend continues all the way up through your journey. Every time you get stronger and progress through the levels, the dragons get bigger. So it feels just as difficult as when you started off. And the same goes for your career. But it makes it hard to realize just how far you've come when all you know is that the work still feels hard. Your work might be difficult for you every single day, and especially if you work in software development or technology. Not only is the work changing every day, but the problems are difficult. They're not routine. But the dragons must get bigger for you to get stronger. If you continually gave 1 + 1 equations to high school students, they wouldn't grow. The problems need to get bigger with their skills. So how can we then appreciate how far we've actually come and what we've accomplished? One of the most satisfying ways I found was to look back on old projects that I'd worked on and delivered, even things I made in university. Look at the deliverables themselves, your old notebooks, your code, and you might notice that these old projects might look amateurish to you now. You could do them much better. And we all know the good old, who wrote this? Oh, it was me, 6 months ago. Sometimes you'll actually look back on old projects and still be proud of them because you still think they were good work. And another method is to keep a log of all the things you've learned this month or this year that you couldn't do before and you can now comfortably do. And for all of these levels, remember the challenges that you overcame and what you gained. Was it a brand new type of problem which you had to be creative with? Did you deal with difficult customers and needed to practice patience? Did you gain determination points for pushing through even though it didn't get any easier, either because you knew you had to or because you thought it was worth the effort and the difficulty? Or was the level testing your self-respect points, having to say no to unreasonable requests, having difficult conversations, or even just knowing when it was right to quit? Sometimes you'll learn that these levels were actually less about the enemies to defeat and more about how you use teamwork to beat them. When I was preparing this presentation, I was struggling to put my thoughts into meaningful words, and I was stubborn about getting help for a good few days. When I started getting people's feedback, not only were they very, very useful to me, but they also made me feel less pressure because I felt supported and people had my back. Maybe you've had a project that got you all excited with the tasks and you charged full steam ahead without ever getting the end user's feedback, only to discover at the end that it wasn't what they wanted or you didn't really have their buy-in. This teaches you the importance of keeping people involved, understanding the main goal, and also understanding what different people's perspectives are. Are you really helping them? Do you really understand what they need? And these are not questions exclusive to work. They apply to many things in our society and our values and our relationships. How we respond to challenges that we face and what we learn from the end, at the end in reflection can sometimes be far greater than the prize we get at the end of the level or what we manage to achieve. Now, I want to emphasize here, there are different ways that you can play a game and progress through the levels. So some players will pick a randomized character, go through the levels really quickly, and beat the main storyline within a day. Some players are thorough, and they have to complete every single side quest available. Heck, some players even watch the full cutscenes without skipping. For me, I play games a little differently. I enjoy games with good mood, story, and aesthetics. I take my time, which is hours actually, to create my character and customize every hair on their beard, choose a nice armor set that complements my sword, exploring the maps, taking screenshots, and building up my environment as if I live in it. I am not one of those fast players. I take my time. And so there are many different ways that people enjoy their game. And the same goes for your career. How you choose to play your career out can be totally different to someone else's. There are different ways to play the game, and each way can be just as valuable and enjoyable as another. So at the end of your career journey, you'll hopefully come out with the following things. So loot or money, a number of dragons slayed, which is your projects and your accomplishments, higher status in the world, and new skills. But it's important to once again reflect on something that we often forget. You. What did your career give to you as a person, and what did you give to your career beyond magic spells and your code and your deliverables? How have you affected the lives of others around you on a personal level? And I lie a bit here, this actually isn't the end. This is something that you can reflect on throughout your whole career. Because careers can end and start anew, and when one journey ends, another can start. So that's why it's important to get something out of it that will carry on. It's important to reflect on you every now and then, because that's something that almost more than these other things mentioned, you can apply to your personal life outside your career. You use your stats with confidence in your relationships. You use your stats in problem solving when your car breaks down. You use your stats in communication when you teach your kids. And the way that you treat others in the workplace has an effect on who they become as people too. You learn to appreciate differences in people that you work with and start to appreciate differences in people in your everyday life. You learn to appreciate your real and many strengths in your career, and you start to appreciate just how much you have to offer this world. Your journey is unique, as are you. Now tell me, how has your career gone? Thank you.